Hey everybody, it's Kelly from Skyline Quilting Co. I hope you're doing great today. Today we're going to be talking about Skyline, and Skyline is our newest overall design ruler. So if you like picket fence and you like twisty, you're going to love Skyline. It creates some nice geometric lines on your quilt, and I'm going to show you 3 or 4 different ways that you can use Skyline, but there's so many more. Because Skyline is not symmetrical, and I'll explain that in the video, but because it's not symmetrical, it creates a whole group of different possibilities for you to quilt with this ruler. So I hope that you enjoy this one, and I hope you can get those quilts quilted. Hey everyone, so today we're going to talk about Skyline, our latest overall design ruler. Now, if you have some of our overall design rulers, so if you have twisty or picket fence, you will notice that this is a little bit different because picket fence and twisty are both symmetrical about the center line. So the top is a mirror image of the bottom. So Skyline is a little bit different, and there's pros and cons to that. The one pro is it gives you more options, more different ways to stitch different designs, where the other two, you can do different designs with them, but because they're symmetrical, it makes it a little bit more difficult. We've also, on this one, supplied an indentation, so if you have Rocket or Spacey or Charming, you'll know what this indentation is. We're going to go over what it is, but there's 2 different sizes here of indentations, and we're going to be talking about that. But I want to start by talking about the marking lines that are on here, just so that it's kind of clear what we've got going on. So the first line that you'll notice is the center line. This center line is the center of the design. So the amount below the design and the amount below the line and the amount above the line is exactly the same. So that's the very center line of our design. And you'll notice that it goes through where the sort of ends, so where your ruler foot ends here, and it also goes where your ruler foot starts. So we're going to start with our ruler foot in this little notch here, and that notch is going to help us line up and get going straight. So we've got that line that goes across there. If we go to the line one below that line, this line is in alignment with the second step. So here's our first step, here's our second, or our valley if you like. But this line that goes across there is where your needle will end up when you come down and you stitch across. And that's handy if I want to, say for example, end up with my bottom of my stitch, this part of the bottom to be the center. So I've got a line marked here on my quilt, and if I come down, that's where I'm going to stitch straight across there if I use this line here to line that up. The one below it, same thing applies. So this opening at the bottom here, the line that stitches across is where your thread will stitch along that bottom line. And then, of course, obviously, as we go up from center, we've got the same here, so that's going to line up that line. And then we've got this line at the very top, which goes across to line up if we were to stitch that line. So those are our main reference lines, and we're going to use those lines to stitch, to line up our rows as we go along, different spacing between our rows. So then we're going to go with the horizontal lines. So this horizontal line here goes right through the center here, of course. That's the line that we're going to stitch. Same with this one, and all the way across. So it gives you good reference lines if you're trying to line up where you want your stitches to start, where you want your stitches to end, or if you're going to line up one row on top of each other. Okay, so let's just stitch a couple of these out. One thing I want to talk about before we get stitching is that this gap here is big enough for your ruler foot and a little bit more. So when you come up this edge, if you want to make sure that you end up with nice sharp points in here, you want to kind of stick and keep your ruler foot against that edge. And when you get up to your top corner or bottom corner, anywhere you're on the inside like that, you want to take an extra stitch to make sure your stitch is well locked, and that's going to give you a nice sharp point in those spots. If you don't, and you come around the inside here, because you're going around a square point with a round foot, you're going to end up with a bit of a round there. And sometimes it'll pull in the corner and it makes it look like the stitches are coming loose. So you really want to make sure in your corners you've got a nice solid stitch there. Okay, so I've got my thread all locked. As I've said before, I'm stitching on the Q16 today. You can do the exact same thing on your domestic machine. The only thing that will be a little bit different for you on your domestic machine is where I've got table space here to go all the way across left to right. If you find you don't have that big of a table, or if you don't have enough throat space on your machine, you can absolutely do the designs working this way instead. So I would just turn my quilt and I would be going front to back like you would normally sew. If you're on your domestic machine, please remember to make sure that you've lowered your feed dogs. Really important, especially when you're stitching over and up like that, otherwise they'll catch. Really important to remember to drop your feed dogs, and also advantageous to put your needle in the down position. So I'm going to lift my ruler foot here and I'm going to slide my ruler underneath. Now, I have spoken in the past, if you've watched other videos, about bringing your ruler foot down where the ruler is and trying to make sure you've got lots of space and clearance for that. So we want to be very careful when we do this. We want to make sure that our needle, our ruler foot is going to come down. Now, if you've got on your domestic machine, if you lower your foot manually, probably a good time to use that because you can kind of go down nice and slow. If you don't, it's fine. Just really make sure that you're coming down in the center of that. You don't want to catch the corner of the ruler and twist your ruler foot. So I'm all lined up there. Now what I want to do is I want to push my ruler so that the engraved line that goes across the center is on the marked line that I've got here. Now typically if I'm doing an overall design on a quilt, and it's a larger quilt, I'll start in the center and then I'll work down and then I'll work up. So I'll do all of the lower part and then all the upper part, or vice versa. But I do tend to start in the center because that gives me the knowledge and the confidence that when I get to the end of the quilt, if I only have to do half of a skyline, I know that at the top I'm going to have to do half a skyline too. You can do the math and figure it out and start at one side or the other, but I do find when I'm quilting either on my long arm or my domestic, I like to start in the center. I just find it's easier for my brain to understand that that's the hardest it's going to be. So I'm all lined up here, taking a double check. Now as you're stitching up and around, you want to make sure you've kind of got something on these fingers, I'll call them fingers, on Skyline. It's going to help make sure that they stay nice and flat, especially if you've got the 1/8 rulers on your domestic machine, because they will be thinner, of course, and you really want to make sure that stays nice and flat. It just means that it's not going to end up on top of your ruler foot or underneath your ruler foot. So it's just a little bit easier to do it that way. So I'm going to just start stitching my first design, taking that pause in that corner, and until you get used to it, go slow. There's no race. As you get going on this, you'll understand that you can go a lot faster, but I'm just going to show you nice and slow. So I'm keeping a finger on those little fingers. Stop there, and then I'm going to go over to my last corner and then back straight up again. And that should make me stop on the line that I just stitched, which it did. So I'm going to then rotate Skyline, because I'm going to do 2 of them in a row here. So I'm going to take a minute, make sure my fabric's flat, and make sure that my line is on top of my marked line again. And then I'm going to carry on and do another path through Skyline. And then I'm back where I started. So at this point, I'm going to lift my ruler foot, and I'm just going to pull my ruler out, and I'm going to show you what that looks like. So that's our first pass of Skyline. Okay, so now there's lots of different options to get us to the next row, and this is going to depend on whether you want to duplicate the row, so you want it exactly the same, or if you want to offset these, which you can do as well. So I'm going to show you a couple different ways to do that. And really, I do recommend that you stitch it out, and you can even use a pencil. You should have a disc inside here if you're going to trace it out to make sure your spacing's the same. But if you're just trying to see if you want the offset, back and forth, or how far you want them apart, you can just use a pencil and trace around one side. It's going to give you a rough idea, and that's just fine. So now I've done, I'm back to my center here. I'm going to drop my ruler foot. And I'm going to use side A, and I'm going to line up this bottom line on the line that I've got marked on my quilt, and I'm going to stitch up that indentation. Now the edge of your ruler should be on the line that you just stitched, and you've got the line across here. So you've got two ways to know that you're stitching square. And I'm going to get to that point. So now I've stitched up, I'm ready to stitch my next line. And I want to duplicate exactly what I did here. I'm going to do the same line over again with that amount of spacing. So I need to go back to A. When I finish this down here, I finished like this, with the B facing to the top of the quilt. So I'm going to slide my ruler up and do the same thing again. So I'm going to lift my ruler foot, slide that under, and bring that ruler foot back down. So at this point, I have the choice of how far apart I want these. So I definitely want to do it exactly the same. I want to repeat the same design. If I want my stitches to be fairly close, and you'll check with the company, your batting that you put in your quilt, you'll check with their recommendations to see how tight your quilting should be. If I want to keep it fairly tight, then I am going to stitch back down that space there and go follow this around. So I've also got on this side, I've got two lines here. So by the N and Skyline, and then between the A and the maple leaf, they're going to line up on the stitch line that I just did, as well as I've got the line where my needle is in alignment with there that's going to line up. So I can come back here and stitch down and repeat this design. Now, if I want to have a bigger space, because maybe I'm going to come and put something else in the center, like circles or a different design through the center, I can slide this up and I can start at this point and then just carry on all the way around and then flip my design, because we've essentially got that first line already. I'm going to do it this way just to save a little space and to show you what it looks like. So I'm going to make sure that I'm lined up, and I'm going to stitch right back down that same line. When I get to the bottom, I'm just going to go and stitch my design again. And again, you want to move your hands so that you're stitching, holding the ruler down the best that you can. And I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to rotate my ruler. And again, I've got my marking lines now where beside the B and between the Y and the M in Silly Moon that are going to line me up so that I know I'm nice and square. And I'm going to stitch one more. And then I'm going to lift my ruler foot, and I'll show you what that looks like. So that's what we're looking like when we've got a mirror, we're duplicating the image. Now we're going to do something a little different. So just to keep our spacing the same, I'm going to use A again, and you can play with your spacing again. We've got two different sizes of spacing there. So I'm going to bring that down, and I'm going to now stitch right back up the line that I just had. So I'm using my center line on top of this block here, so I know that I'm nice and square. Let's go nice and slow so you're stitching on top of that same line. I'm going to stitch to the top, and then I'm going to slide my ruler. Now here what we did is we started like this. So I now want to offset this ruler a little bit. So I'm going to lift my ruler foot, and I'm going to slide my ruler foot through here, but I'm not going to stitch yet. I'm going to go about to here so that this line is now on top of the line that I just stitched, and I'm going to bring my ruler foot down. So essentially I'm starting part way through the design. So that's about that's halfway through the design. The K on Skyline is halfway through the design this way. So I'm going to start halfway through the design and then carry on from there, and it's just going to create a bit of a different look. And then when I reach that point, I'm going to flip this again. And now I've got my line by my A to make sure I'm nice and square. And I've got two little lines over here to also make sure I'm square. If you have to stop and readjust your fabric, go ahead and do that. And then because we did half a design, we have to rotate and do another half to end up at the end of our quilt. We're assuming that this last line is the end of our quilt. Oh, and I went a little too far. That's okay, it's just a practice quilt. So then I'm going to lift this up, and I'm going to bring my ruler, my needle up, as well as my ruler foot at this point. And then I can just slide that out. You can trim your threads if you want. You would lock your stitches at this point. So I can pull this away and then just bring my bobbin thread up. I'm not going to bother locking them there. So I'll just pull this out and show you what it looks like now. As you can see, I went a stitch too far, and that's okay. Get excited about it. So those are two of the different ways that this can end up looking. So this is where we're doing exactly the same design all through the quilt. So with our spacing, we did spacing A, and we can see that's going to repeat itself all the way through the quilt. And then if you take just these last two, you can see how it looks with it offset. So there's lots of different ways to do this. And now we're going to do something a little different again. So I'm going to go back to the point here where I ended. Just lock my stitches there. So now I'm at the center point. I'm going to use A again, but I'm only going to stitch halfway up. So I'm only going to stitch to there. So I'm now back at the center point. So I stitched halfway. Now I'm at the top peak of this row here. So I'm going to lift my ruler foot again. And I'm going to put my ruler under. And you can at this point determine where you want this to be. If you want things to overlap or not, it's a whole lot of fun to just play with different ways and shapes that this ends up being. So if I were to do this, I will end up closing this little block and going up and coming back down, and it'll create a different design. I don't really want to do that. I don't want to close that block. So I'm going to shift this over just a little bit so that I end up with a different design again. So you can shift Skyline to wherever you kind of feel like, and you can actually get it so that it's overlapping. So you can slide Skyline down here, and you're going to create a different look again. It's going to create some overlapping. So I'm going to come straight across here, and now I'm going to come down and then back up. So you'll end up with little blocks in there, a whole bunch of different designs. So again, I recommend that you kind of play with it and come up with some different designs. So we've stitched halfway up again with A. So let's figure out where we kind of want to start there. And I don't really want to duplicate any of my lines. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to just start at this point and stitch up. Again, I've got lines here, here, and here to make sure that I'm going nice and square. And I'm going to stitch up and over. And then I'm going to turn my ruler there. And then I'm going to do one more, just to get me to the end. And then I'll stop there. And I'm just going to bring my thread up, my needle up, get this out of the way so I can show you. I'll just pull that bobbin thread out, or top thread. So you can see again, another different design. So if you want to create a nice random design, you can just change your spacing as you go along and it will end up creating a random design. So you've got bigger spaces here, smaller spaces here, but then if you come down here, it's totally different geometric between the two lines. And then if you look at this one, it's just a repeat of the same one. So the one ruler, by playing with different spacing and different positioning of where you put it, you can create a whole bunch of different designs. So I'm going to do more videos on Skyline and different options, but I do suggest you play with it. I think that's probably enough for now to get you started. Again, just remember Skyline is not symmetrical above the center, so this, where it goes up here, is not the same distance as where it comes down here. Just to remember that, so you're not thinking it's symmetrical, but you can complete repetitive design by doing it this way, or you can complete a design that is offset, or offset again with different spacing. So lots of different options and how you set this up to create different designs on your quilt. So I hope that you enjoyed that video. I love Skyline. It creates some good geometry, so especially if you've got some rounded type designs on your quilt, it's a great accent, and it's just a great overall design, and it's one that you can really customize to make it so that it doesn't look like you used a ruler for an overall design. By changing the distance between the rows and offsetting the ruler at different locations, you can create a whole bunch of different designs. So I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you do, please give us a like, subscribe down below, and please put in the comments if you have any questions. And of our 3 overall design rulers, what one do you like the best? I'd love to hear it. Thanks so much, everyone. Take care. Have an amazing day.